I guess we're about ready to start. I want everyone to meet Dawn Siebel. This is the artist who painted all these portraits, and she's going to talk today about the effort to paint these and how they came about. And she's also got upstairs, she has a room full of her paintings. And what I've learned about Dawn is that she is very interested in history, being a witness to history, and very concerned about the state of the earth. And that's just a general thing. So without further ado, there's Dawn.
Thank you all for coming. Much better than talking to an empty room. I'm going to give you a little background, but actually what I'm also going to tell you is a lot of stories, because I've learned a lot of stories about these men over the years. And one thing I loved from the beginning in this project is that this is 343 individuals. And so just to back up, I lived in New York City for the best part of 22 years in Manhattan. I was living in the mountains outside Boulder on 9/11. Woke up, my clock radio told me a small plane had flown into the World Trade Center. I was a New Yorker instantly, went downstairs, turned on the TV, watched the second plane fly in, sat there all day long like millions of people around the world. And sometime around 3 o'clock Colorado time, somebody on TV said, "We think that more than 300 firefighters died today." That burst my bubble. That was when I saw it. Maybe I'd had a tear or two. I'd been there in shock most of it, but that did it. They're the ones who ran in. They're not the only ones who ran in, but they're the ones who ran in. So 10 days later, maybe it was 12 days later, the New York Times printed a 2-page spread, a copy of it is on the wall down there, with all of their pictures. And when I saw that, I said, oh, someday I can do something about this. So I folded it up and I put it in a place away from the air, because it was a newspaper and it would discolor every time. And it was several years before I said, oh, I'll paint them on burned blocks of wood. And to the left of you are 2 other pieces of mine. The first littler one was painted after this one. The bigger one was painted before this one, but it's also blocks of wood, smaller but floating off the space. The same thing I'm doing here. So that sort of gave me the idea. So I knew that this project would be thousands of hours, and I knew that the only part of it I didn't have to do was the original preparation of the blocks, which I was guessing would take about 100 hours, maybe more. It took about 150 hours. I applied to get an art intern from CU Boulder to help do that part of it. And I missed the cutoff the first year, and I had to wait an entire year to be assigned an intern again. But I waited, and during that time, I worked with a guy who had built all of the painting stuff, the wooden panels that I painted on, and he was just really good. Technically, we figured out everything about the exhibit in that year until I got assigned an intern, and Rachel was great. And one of the things I had to figure out was, how do I burn the edges of the blocks and not the center? So each of these spaces is hiding a drill hole in the middle. I went to a friend's log yard. He set us up with a drill press, and we drilled that hole right in the center, because their painting was going to go over it. I could hide that hole later. So we skewered them on about 5 or 7 metal rods. I put a washer in between each one for a little bit of spacing. And I torqued them so they weren't all quite square, so the fire could come around the edges. And we used Rachel used the acetylene torch, and we burned them all, and then they had to come off, and then anyway, blah, 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 and then it got to this, but it did take about 150 hours just to prepare the wood. And then I started painting them, and all I had for reference in the beginning was those dot-printed images from the New York Times, which is terrible. Only, thankfully, I didn't know how terrible it was when it started, or I probably wouldn't have. But I got 100 paintings in and realized this is way bigger than I can do by myself. myself, and besides, literally, who am I? I knew one firefighter, a volunteer firefighter in Boulder County. That was the only firefighter I knew at that time in my life. And it was just a bigger project than I could manage on my own. And so I Googled and went searching for a fire organization to partner with. And I found something called the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation that are based in Maryland. And they were created by Congress with the unfunded mandate to support the co-workers and the families of those first responders who die in the line, die or wounded in the line of duty. That's their mission. So I approached them. If they had said no, it wouldn't have happened. There wasn't another one that could step in. Even though these guys are all union firefighters, I was living in the mountain of Colorado. I knew how valuable volunteer firefighters are. And the organization I'm with represents all firefighters, wildland, volunteer, career, all of them. So anyway, it took a little while for them to say yes. They'd never done anything like that. They actually went and asked permission of the FDNY before they came on board, and finally I met them in Colorado Springs for the Union Memorial one year, and they said, okay, we're going to do it. And then I really started painting the rest of them. And then they gave me a copy of the FDNY's memorial booklet, which came out the year after. And then I had better pictures. They were about this big, and they weren't dot printed. But some of the families had changed out the photos, and I was committed to using those original pictures because those were their real FDNY pictures at the time. But thankfully, I got those better ones. So we did it. We wound up doing a 10-city tour in 20, I get dates mixed up, so 2011 and 2012. And then I got the paintings back in my possession. And when I finally got them back in my possession again, I repainted about 80 of them. Because I had again found better images and things I could improve, so I did. And I'm glad I did. And then the paintings went to Colorado Springs for an exhibit there, and that was in 2012. And then they were in a museum in Massachusetts. It was supposed to be a 3-month exhibit that turned into a 10-month exhibit because so many people came. And then last year they were in Trinidad because I'd moved to Trinidad. And then thank you, Brent and Maria, because this year they're here and they're not in their crates. So that's the background story. So when I was touring, in the beginning, we were going to fire conventions, really. They were always open to the public, but it was really firefighters that were coming to see this. And they told me the first stories that I learned about these guys, because there's people that they came to see on the wall. Ray Downey, they came to see him. He was one of the most experienced firefighters on the planet, literally. He was called, his nicknames were Master of Disaster, and I think they just called him God. But anyway, he ran the Oklahoma City post, the FEMA operation in Oklahoma City following the bombing there. He testified before Congress multiple times. He taught all across the country, which is why firefighters all across the country knew who he was. And he was helping. For a lot of these guys, maybe more than half of them, we don't really know how they died or where they were, unless we found them later, but we don't know. But Ray and another battalion chief were helping a civilian with a torn Achilles tendon, and he had his arm around each of their shoulders, and they were moving him to safety when the South Tower came down on top of him. So the most experienced firefighter in the world died in the simplest way. But Ray Downey Jr. was one of the ones. And then right here, Patrick Brown. But Patty Brown was another one that firefighters across the country to see him. He was known for jogging to the firehouse with his yoga mat rolled up under his arm. And he had a grand piano in his apartment. He was outside the firefighter tradition. There's a lot of stories about him, but firefighters haven't told me many of them. I think some of them might be a little racy or something, but he, beloved, and also somebody who taught firefighters around the country. And the other person that they came to see, and probably the most visited face on the wall, is Michael Judge, the priest. He's the second oldest person on the wall, and he was 73 or something. But and they changed the rules after he died so that a fire chaplain who dies in the line of duty also receives the same death and disability benefits that the firefighters do. And he was, I cry sometimes about this, but he was much beloved. And he was doing last rites. He was in the lobby of the North Tower praying nonstop. There's Pfeiffer. Here, his brother, his twin brother, who looks just like him and is in the French Brothers film that you see from 9/11. His brother ran the command post in the lobby of the North Tower, and his brother survived. But so it's his brother who says that he just watched Michael Judge just praying nonstop and doing last rites for jumpers and everything, anybody that he could. And he actually died of a heart attack. So when the South Tower came down, North Tower was the first one hit, the South Tower was the first to come down because the plane hit so much lower. And anyway, he died of a heart attack, and his death is 001 for that day. Even though he was not the first to die, they designated him the first, and the fire took his body off-site, so he was, not there when the North Tower came down later. But he's a much appreciated person. Now, after I toured with this and got these stories, when I got them back, I also started researching and wrote a short little anecdote about each of them that I post daily on, I have a Facebook page for this, Better Angels 911. And I post their picture along with a little story, and there I do one a day in order by company. So the stories go along with the men that they responded with and not alphabetically like they are here. And in the process of doing that research is where I learned a lot more about them. So this guy, Danny Siller, he was the first firefighter to die that day. And he was killed by a jumper. And Michael Judge did last rites for Danny Siller. After that, nobody's coming in and out from the plaza level, because there about 200 people jumped. We'll never know. That's the approximation. I consider us lucky in this country because our TV stations did not show that. If you were in London, you were watching the jumpers all morning. Close up, zoomed in. We didn't have to see that. That is not buried in our memory from that day, which is awful enough. But his company and the other company that shared the firehouse then carried Danny's body off-site to the church where those photos are taken in the other room. And while they were away, the North Tower came down where they were. And they all felt that he had just saved their life. With his, sorry. When no, I'm not going to get to that, but thank you. So when the New York Times thing down there, it told me that there was a father and son on the wall and two brothers, and that was all I knew when I started. And here is the father and son. Joseph Angelini Sr. was the oldest active duty firefighter in the FDNY. I think he was 63. He would have had mandatory retirement at 65. He really never wanted to retire. And he was off duty that day, as maybe 20 to 25% of these guys were off duty, and they came in anyway. And he was a big stickler for always carry all your gear. I don't care how much it weighs, all your gear is going with you all that time. But because it was off duty, he arrived on the site with no gear. But he was helping on the ground. He used to play tricks with his grandkids. He would go and hide a teddy bear and turn off all the lights, and then he would make them crawl on their hands and knees and find the teddy bear and then do mouth-to-mouth and resuscitation. A lot of these guys had fire drills. In fact, when I traveled with the firefighters, we were in big hotels, they wouldn't stay above the 5th floor. They know how far the ladder goes. Firefighters don't stay. I don't care if the view's better up, they don't really stay up there. But anyway, and this is the father and son. The brothers happen to be all side by side down here. Brother, 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 brother. Just because alphabetically they have to go that way. And then there are two whose brothers were police officers who also died on 9/11. One is Vigiano, his brother was a policeman. His father, these firefighters often come from families of firefighters. Their fathers are firefighters, their uncles are firefighters, their kids become firefighters. A lot of children of the guys on this wall became firefighters after 9/11. His father was a retired firefighter, and it was a band of fathers who were then on the pile helping every day, trying to help them find stuff, who all later died of cancer. Lee Ielpy, Jonathan Ielpy. His father was the one who actually set up that first museum that was down at Ground Zero, if any of you guys went to New York, that was right next to the Ten House, which is the old fire station that's right there at Ground Zero also. And was very instrumental. But he died about 5 or 6 years back, again from cancers likely that came from being on that pile every day. And Jonathan's body was one of the very few that were found intact. And his turnout suit is on exhibit in the 9/11 museum down at Ground Zero, because it was first in the little museum that his father had set up, but then it got passed over to the 9/11 museum. Tommy Foley. I met Tommy Foley's mother when the exhibit was on tour in New York, and she gave me a little booklet that the family had written about Tommy, and she gave me a videotape to watch, and she told me this story. So Tommy, the year before, maybe 2 years before, he was one of People Magazine's 100 Most Eligible Bachelors. And his was a shirtless photo in there. I haven't seen his eligible bachelor. We had a visitor last year in Trinidad who knew Tommy from the rodeo circuit out west, because he used to come out here and ride in the rodeo some of the summers. A lot of these guys had like bit parts being actors in New York film TV shows like NYP, they just were them, and The Sopranos. So he was often, they hired firefighters to be firefighters and cops to be cops in those shows, in the background things. So he was in Sopranos and a few other. He lived life to the fullest. He was one of those kind of guys. I'm quite sure he is better looking than my painting of him. My painting is dependent on that original photo. But the story his mother told me was the father promised her, we're going to find Tommy and bring him home. His brother was also a firefighter. So his brother is in the guys working in the pile, trying to help people. Unmasked. It made me mad then, and makes me mad, furious to this day that they were not protected. But they weren't. And the father went to the roof of Ten House, which is the old two-story brick firehouse that's right on the edge of the whole site. And he went there with a pair of high-res binoculars. And day after day, he's looking over the pile, trying to find his son. He finds a helmet with Rescue 3 on it, somewhere in the pile. And he lets them know down below that where he's seen this helmet from up above. It's still too hot. They can't even lower a camera in there because it will still melt. But they put an orange cone where he'd seen that. And when they go back, that's where they find Tommy. So he did bring him home, and the brother was one of them to help carry him out. So it's really sad that we don't know a lot of those kind of stories about many of these guys, but we do know some. So Angel Ward over here. He was, the week before 9/11, he had already been photographed to be one of the firehouse hunks in the next year's calendar. It was not used. There's a couple guys on this wall who were photographed to be one of the months that next year. The week before, he had won $250,000 in a brand new Jeep in a Fox reality show called Murder in a Small Town, where you were supposed to solve this made-up murder, follow the clues. And so he had just sprinkled with fairy dust. He had just won $250,000 in a brand new Jeep in that show. 9/11. So you have the North Tower and the South Tower, and you also had the Marriott Hotel, which was maybe a 12-story hotel, which was right surrounding the South Tower. It was right there underneath it. And one of the plane's engines was found in the jacuzzi on the top floor in the health club in that hotel. And that hotel came down in two pieces. Half of it came down when the North Tower came down, and the other half came down when the South Tower came down. Actually, the South Tower came down first, and the North Tower brought the rest down. So he was part of the crew going through, making sure that there was nobody in any room in that hotel going down. And then suddenly they didn't know that a tower had gone down. They just knew that they couldn't go down the hallways anymore. And they went down the stairwell. There were maybe a group of 20 between firefighters and civilians that they were helping to evacuate. And the stairway was blocked, and they couldn't figure out how to get out past it. So he remembered that they had left some rope way up on the top. So he went running back upstairs to get that rope, because they thought they'd have to rappel down the pile. guy still in the stairwell actually found a way around it and radioed up that they found a way, but he was running down and did not make it down. That group that left behind got out in time, but he and Lieutenant Petty, who was with him, did not get out. That's where he died in Marriott. Stephen Siller. Stephen Siller was not on duty. He was in a firehouse in Brooklyn. He got to Brooklyn. His company had already been called in. He got his gear, drove his pickup truck to the tunnel that connects Brooklyn to Lower Manhattan. And the tunnel was closed to traffic. So he put on his 75 pounds of gear and he ran 5 kilometers through the tunnel to get there. We never found him. He's one of the many whose body we never found. So what happened when he got there, we don't know. But his family then started a foundation in his name, which is the Tunnel to Towers Foundation. It runs the largest 5K run in the world. They do one in New York City, rerunning his route, but there are satellite runs around the country. In fact, last year we had discussions about maybe starting one in Trinidad as an annual thing. But they have raised more than $250 million, which they distribute to, now it's mainly military, I learned, but they distribute to disabled firefighters and veterans. So if you need a smart wheelchair or a smart home, that's what they do. That's what they build for you. And anyway, it's ongoing. It's a really wonderful foundation. Above him is Oriole Palmer. Oreo had won the FDNY Fitness Award 5 years in his career already. The award is now named for him. He was a marathoner. He was a battalion chief. And he's called in, and the elevators, the safety mechanism on the elevator, first the elevators were 3 sections. You could go the first third, you could do the elevators in the middle third, you could do the top, and you could do one express elevator that go the whole way. And if the elevator was not stopped at the perfect floor when the planes hit the building, if it was even this much off, then the doors wouldn't open. There was an elevator in the lobby of the South Tower where the door was open. This one person squeezed through that door and got out. But one fire crew went and got their jaws of life, and they spent every minute they had trying to open that elevator door to rescue those people, and they were not successful. But Oriole Palmer fixed one of the local elevators and rode it from the lobby up to the 30-something floor. I don't know which it was, whatever, 30, 40, somewhere in there. And then got out, and then he ran up the next 37 flights of stairs up to the floor where the elevators changed. And in the south, I think it's the 77th floor, and in the South Tower, that's where the tip of the wing pierced the building at the lowest level. And so when he got there, he was reporting on his radio the whole way up, because communications were so bad that day. They didn't know until later. They heard the recordings that after it was all over, they could tell the information that he was feeding them all the way up. But he got there, and the jet fuel had shot down the elevator shafts and blown out the doors. So there were people waiting in the lobby for the elevator down who were just incinerated on that floor. But there were also a couple people alive on that floor that had been around the corner. And there was another elevator that was stuck and the doors couldn't open with people inside. And he did manage to open that elevator, and the building came down a minute later. The other person who ran up as high as Oriole Palmer and was up there with him was Ronnie Bucca. And Ronnie Bucca was the fire marshal, which as a grade school kid, I thought fire marshal, yada, yada, yada. Actually, fire marshal is a very high position within the fire department. And Ronnie Bucca was another marathoner. And Ronnie Bucca had been in charge of the World Trade Center back when the first bombing happened in the parking garage years. And he had been waiting for a long time for something else to happen in that building. But he also ran up and got up as high as Oriole Palmer was trying to help those people when the building came down. I know this guy's brother. And I'm going to use Pete just to tell 2 stories. So one is that I know Pete had a really thick black mustache, which is not in his painting because it wasn't in his photo. I know a lot of these guys had thick black mustaches, or I painted them with black hair and they had gray hair by the time this came around. Or you're supposed to, every time you get a promotion, go in and get a new photo taken. There's a lot of guys here in black hats that should have been wearing white hats, but they never had that next photo taken. So Pete, he was never found. He is one of, I wish I can't remember the number off the top of my head anymore, but it's somewhere between 10 and 15 babies were born to these men after 9/11. And to people who died in that building, it's more like 50 or 60 babies were born to fathers that were lost that day. And Pete's child was born on his birthday, which was Christmas that year. So another thing that I learned from his brother Vinny is that they hadn't found Pete. Years had gone by. She actually remarried. And then she decided, I can't do this anymore. I can't have you come to it with a fragment of bone. I can't. I need to, he's buried, he's got a gravestone. I have to move on with my life. Which meant that should they find a bone and identify it as Pete's, they would never be informed, which also meant that his parents would never be informed. Because the wife is the first, that's the one, the family member. If there's no wife, then it would fall to the parents or whatever. But that was an interesting piece of information that I just learned because I know Vinny. Okay, youngest and oldest. I believe he is the youngest on the wall. And there's about 6 or 8 probies on this wall, which means they weren't even officially firefighters yet. They were still in their final probationary 6 months or something else. He had aced his exam. Many of them do that. And they found a note. His family found a note after he died saying, if I die in the line of duty, take care of my girlfriend. They'd been together for years, but they weren't married. Take care of my girlfriend. Don't worry about me. I was doing what I wanted to do. And see you in heaven. Those are pretty, I can't remember. There were 4 points, but those were the more salient. But there were a bunch of notes like that found afterwards. Oldest person on the wall. He was 1 year older than Michael Judge, the priest. And he is a deputy commissioner. Deputy commissioner is a half fire department, half civilian job, which is the only reason he didn't have mandatory retirement. And Bill, he was known for just being the one to still, 70 years old, and he's still running into the building in the fire to see what's going on. And he knew inside, he grew up, he went up through the fire, promoted up through the fire departments, just starting at the lowest rung and doing every position along the way through all of his years. And he was much beloved, as was the chief of department, who's also on the wall that I'll get down to later. Terry Hatton. Terry Hatton, his nickname was Manhattan. His firehouse was in the theater district. He had one of the busiest houses. I have known from firefighter when I toured and met all these firefighters everywhere that some of these houses have as many calls in a day or a week certainly as this other company has an entire year. I mean, just the amount of fires and emergencies that these guys respond to is just really different. But Terry Hatton, even though he had a really busy firehouse, he was also known for taking his guys when they didn't have a call into the bowels of all the theaters in the theater district, because they're like little warrens underneath it. So they would know what was there should they ever have to go there to respond to a fire. His wife was Giuliani's executive assistant. Giuliani married them. Giuliani did his funeral. He did not know it at the time, but there was a little Terry Hatton on the way. It was a girl, but she got named Terry anyway. But he did not know his wife was pregnant on 9/11. And just a ton of medals. A lot of these, I can't remember all of them. But some of the saves that these guys have done before 9/11, like jumping into the East River fully clothed, because you've seen someone go in their car, drive off the drive, and rescuing that guy, and just, there was about one of these guys, I can't remember right now which one it was, before he was a firefighter, he was just out for a job, and he saw smoke coming out of the house. So he went in, he brought the wife out, he went in, he brought the husband out, he went in, he brought the pets out, and he continued on his job. And then he became a firefighter. So this guy, he had this amazing rescue. Again, these have these just amazing rescue, non-9/11 rescues. So Their ladder, their extended ladder will normally reach a 10-story building, but this 10-story building on fire had a cornice between like its 8th floor and the roof or something, so the ladder couldn't reach. And it was a very windy day, and there was a mother with 2 babies up there on the top floor. So he is the one chosen to go way up to the top of the ladder. He's hanging on, and the ladder goes in, and he grabs the baby, and he brings it back, and he carries it down the ladder and hands it off. Goes back up to the top, the ladder swings in, grabs baby number 2, rescues it the same way. And some of these guys rode their tricycles down to the firehouse every time they heard the alarm going off, because it was down the street, and they just, grew up that way. Vernon Cherry had a beautiful singing voice and was known for singing all the time. And when the FDNY did its memorial many months after 9/11 in Madison Square Garden, which was filled, he sang the national anthem on tape. It was recorded from before. His wife said he always wanted to play the garden. So I told you about Terry Hatton over there, and his wife was Giuliani's assistant, and Higgins. And they were both like specially chosen by Ray Downey Jr., who was the first one I showed you. And he was in the squad, and I think Terry might have been a rescue company. But they were 2 of the top guys. And he and his squad responded to a mayday from Terry's squad. So other firefighters are going down because they're getting a recall. They're getting the evacuate call to get out of there. And they're telling him, nope, we'll see you, we're going up. So he went up. They were found a day apart and not far apart, but he didn't manage to. And what the mayday was about, we really don't know. But they didn't get out. But Higgins was one of us, Gansey. And when I toured with the firefighters, especially when this exhibit was on the East Coast and I got a lot of New York firefighters, they liked this guy, which is not always true of the head of your department, but they liked Gansey. And so he had the command post. Somewhere around here, I think we have that other building that fell later in the day, and they're going, oh, why did that building fall? He said that building's going to fall, don't even go in there. We made sure there's no more people. Just stay out of there. There's nothing to save in that building. It was no surprise. He thought the buildings might fall, but he thought they had way more hours before they might fall. But he had already pre-ordered a evacuation thing that the buildings came down before that clicked in. But he was running the command center in the street. And the South Tower came down, and they ran under, and they just made it into the parking garage into the World Financial Center, which is right next door. And then they come out all dusty out the back, and then they set up their command center in another place that they thought would be safer, but it wasn't, because that's where the other tower came down on them later. But his nickname was Bronco. I can sort of see why. No, I mean, some of these guys, I mean, they're like 6'4", 6'6", and anyway, they're not all of it. And one of the first things that I asked when I met firefighters from New York is, why are there no women on this wall? Because there's no women on this wall. And they said, well, there are more women in the FDNY than there were then, but the physical requirements were really strong. But also, there were women from the FDNY who responded, but their job then was not to go in the building. Thankfully, a lot of the guys that responded did not die there. But that's why there were no women. I mean, basically you have to be able to carry me up like 5 flights of stairs or down 5 flights of stairs or something like that to meet the qualifications. So we focus a lot. You always hear 3,000 Americans died that day. That's not true. We weren't all Americans. There were a ton of people from other countries, especially not at the Pentagon so much, and maybe not so much on the plane that went down, but there definitely were in the World Trade Center. 9/11 was the largest loss of life the UK has ever had in a single terrorist incident, even with Northern Ireland. The UK lost more people on 9/11 in the World Trade Center than they had lost ever before. Even Trinidad and Tobago lost like 9 people or something in the building. It was crazy. But when I was gathering other information for the exhibit last year, I came upon something that I had not found before, and I found really interesting. So, if you were in the building above where the planes hit, you pretty much had no chance. There are 4 people who found their way down from above where the plane hit in the South Tower and got out safely. 4 of them. One of them saw the fireball in the other building, didn't know it was a plane, went down to the lobby. They said, oh, no, it's okay, go back. So he went back up to his place on the 100 whatever floor, and then he's sitting at his desk, and he's watching the nose of the plane coming straight for him. He dives underneath his desk, says something like, God, it's in your hands or something. And literally, he survives it. The ceiling, the suspended ceiling, the electrical comes down, everything's crashing. He hears people, he's stuck, he yells out, they call him, they rescue him, and they get him down. He and one other guy decided that they would try to find a way down the stairwell. Other people went to the roof, which was no way out, because the door was locked at the roof, and there was no way to do roof rescues, which they didn't know at the time. But he is one of the ones one of the 4 who actually made it out. So in the North Tower, the first plane cut through the building from the 93rd to the 99th floor, so way high in the building. An estimated 1,355 people from the 92nd to the 110th floor lost their lives, because they had no chance. 16 minutes later, the second plane cut through the South Tower, of course, from the 77th to the 85th. 77th, again, that's where Oriole Palmer got to and the thing. Of the estimated 6,000 civilians who began the morning in the South Tower below the 77th floor, all but 11 safely got out. I think that's astonishing. Of the 7,545 people who began below the 93rd floor of the North Tower, all but 107 escaped. So all but 100, not counting the people who ran in to help them, but all but 118 people who could get out didn't get out. And that's astonishing, because they were helping them and they were helping each other, I just think that's an amazing thing. And that 16 minutes in between when people did evacuate and weren't told to go back upstairs is why the numbers were lower in the South Tower than the North Tower. So, along the lines of that, when this painting was toured in one of the 10 cities it went to was outside Tampa in Clearwater, Florida. And there was a woman who came with her husband. And she said she came from a couple hours away. She'd seen it on the TV, so she came over. And I gave her space because she went through it like this. She looked at every painting on the wall. It took her half an hour, 40 minutes, something or other. And she finally came over to talk to me when it was over and told me that she'd driven from far away. And she said she started that morning on the 70-something floor of the North Tower and started walking down with a friend. And somewhere in the 30s, they were exhausted. This was not a marathoner, not a physically fit woman. That's a lot of stairs to go down. Firefighters are going up past them. And they sit on the stairs to rest. And some young firefighter going up gives her his oxygen mask to take a couple deep breaths out of, and gives it to her friend to take a couple of deep breaths out. And he says, now get up and get out. And so she did. And her friend said, I need a few more minutes to rest. The woman made it out with no more than 5 minutes. Her friend never made it out. She was trying to find him on the wall. She said, I wish I knew which one he was. And I'm sure there are many people like her who would say, I wish I knew which one he was. But, so, that's it. Got any questions?
What was the age of the youngest and the oldest?
Right here, side by side. So Camerata was like 21 or something and 74, I think. And they just happened to be right there. And there's a couple others who are probies who are very close in age to him, but I think by months, I think that he made it. He was the youngest. So his family is the only one that reached out to me after this was done and said, could you possibly use a different photo of his? And I actually happen to think he's pretty swarthy and good looking in this one. But he didn't look, he was, he didn't go get his new photo. He was grayer and more whatever. And I explained to them why I felt that I needed to use the original on all of them and not start going to this one for that. And they were like, okay, we understand. That's it. That's that. And I think Raymond Downey is sort of good looking. He was a model on the side, you can sort of see in this one. And he was off duty, and he was actually playing golf. And he left the golf course, got to the place, and got to 10 House or something, and when the towers, he dove under one of the fire trucks, which is where he was killed. Sometimes those fire trucks saved the people who dove underneath them and that, and sometimes that was where they were found.
Do you know if there's a number of the firefighters who survived?
So another thing that happened that day is that, people were going into duty when they weren't on duty, so they weren't even sure for a long while about who had actually shown up because it wasn't clear. And so they don't even know, I don't even know if that number is answerable. The ones who responded that day who survived. Yes?
I've reached this point in my life where I've known more people who have died than I know who are living. And that's kind of a place where many of us maybe have reached. And I really appreciate your capacity to celebrate our ancestors and to really bring this to us. I admire it a great deal, and it's so poignant and loving to humanity. I especially like the piece in the corner, and I don't want to interrupt the vein that we're in, but what compels you to do all of this tribute to our
My own
dad?
father's death, actually preceding his death. I suddenly got all the old family photos. I'm the girl in the family, so she'll take care of them.
Oh,
So I got all the old family photos from him, so suddenly I got all the ancestors. I was responsible for the ancestors.
That's awesome.
And I knew that Dad knew a lot of stories about these people that I didn't. And as soon as he was gone, those stories would be gone. And so I started taking stories that I knew and attaching them to this and putting them on paintings and sort of sending them out into the world. And at the same time, or a few months later, my mother, who had not been married to my father for 40 years, gave me all the old family photos from her side. So it was all of that. That was what started that. And those are all ancestor pictures in the bottles on that.
Oh, is that your family?
That ancient, yeah, those are old, yeah.
I wondered who they were.
Yeah, I don't know who they are, but they came in those trove, a lot of those old studio cards, they had in the
Okay.
1800s and early 1900s.
Well, I just really get it. I get it.
Thank you.
About the scale,
Yes.
you've got a preponderance of bottles on one side and then less so on the other.
No significance to that, except
No.
more of the hooks will hang on the left side than the right side. The only reason.
I figured they were the living and they were the dead.
No, it's not.
No.
No such thing. And that scale I found in the woods outside my mountain home in Colorado where I was living on 9/11. And I thought it was just a piece of art, so I saved it and turned it into a piece of art.
So
Yes.
I was just going to say, if you point that out, because many people don't know what we're talking about.
Oh,
So,
the piece in the corner with the grass growing up above.
There's pictures in each.
That's called the
There's
wage
a picture
history.
in each bottle.
What?
Is there a photograph in each bottle?
There's a photograph in each bottle. I took the old photo and I printed it on acetate, and then I cut it into the shape of the inside of the bottle, rolled it up, dropped it in the bottle, and then it opened up again.
Oh.
So that's how it all got there.
Just so you know, Dawn, giving tours here since you opened, everyone is moved by
Good,
this.
thank you.
They are absolutely moved by
Well, I'm now on a mission to get the permanent home for these guys. I think it's time, they deserve it.
I would love to do one upstairs with your paintings, another one of these.
What, a talk? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be different. I could tell different stories about those.
Yeah,
But,
you're fantastic.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you just painted each one. Does
So-
it take days?
Well, so here, and First thing I did is an old trick. I didn't make it up, but I'm really glad I did it. And again, one thing I love from the beginning of this, before I painted any of them, was how they're all individuals. I was really aware that they're all individuals. So I had all the wood burned, and I laid it out on the floor to make sure that I could distribute the most burned blocks around the whole piece and not have them clump up in one place or something. And then I took the photos, which I had blown up to the size that I wanted. So again, the universe intervened in a number of ways on this. First place, I chose balkan birch for the wood just because it was the wood I had used for everything else, because it doesn't really warp. It was actually the perfect wood to choose because it's a very high-grade plywood, if you don't know, very thin layers, and it burns in layers. It would have burned completely different if it had been a solid block of wood. It was the perfect choice, but I didn't know that. I had planned the paintings to be bigger, but the burn burned more, so the paintings had to shrink. I think they shrunk to the perfect size. And then I blew them all up to the size that I wanted, and I laid them out alphabetically on those blocks I laid out on the floor, and then I randomly collected them. This is 343, which is only divisible by 7, so it's 7 rows of 49 columns. 7 panels with 49 per panel. And I then randomly picked them up in 49 and put them in a box so that you wouldn't see the finished thing and you wouldn't see me get better. In the end, I didn't need to do that because I had to do so much repainting and going back, and I told you I already repainted 84 of them when I finally got them back in my possession. So it would have mixed up. So the next thing that I did was I didn't look at them right side up. So when I transferred the image with carbon paper from my blow up to this, just the outlines of the face, it was upside down. And when I painted it, it was upside down. And it wasn't until I finished my first painting session and basically laid in the foundation that I turned it right side up, and it was like, oh, hello. And then I painted him right side up the rest of the time, unless I ran into trouble on that face. And then I put it back upside down again. It's an old trick. It circumvents your brain. And the reason I did that was because we all carry ideas about a face in our head, about how wide this is, or this, and I didn't want that. So upside down, it had nothing to do with my ideas about a face. It had to do with proportion and balance and light and dark. And then the foundations were set, and then I could do it right side up. So
You did the foundation from a tracing paper?
just the outline.
Outline.
Yeah, and then I only used black, white, and raw umber. There's only colors I use on this. Same for the 2 grade school pictures beyond that. Those 2 things down there, black, white, and raw umber was my palette. But yeah, I'm really glad I did that trick. I think it made a huge difference. Yes?
So I sort of enjoy mathematics, and I find some sort of mysticism in mathematics. And the fact that this is 7 cubed, this is kind of makes
another thing that turned out perfectly.
Is that actually the number? Is that
Yeah, 343.
Because it's 7 by 7 by 7.
And this is perfect, because you don't have to look too high and you don't have to look too low.
Yeah.
It just, again, all those things I had no control over, really, but they turned out the right way. So.
And the firefighters union that sponsored the tour?
Not the union, the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. But we went together looking for money, and we tried to get money. We tried all sorts of places. If you know New York City at all, we had Vanderbilt Hall and Grand Central Terminal reserved for several months and could never get the funding to put it there. It would have been a spectacular place. One thing I learned in New York City is that the fire department is way more powerful than the police department, and there's no policeman on my wall. And there were 70 policemen that died. There were I think 45 Port Authority police and 35 NYPD, or maybe the reverse of that, but none of them are on my wall. And so it was problematic getting this shown in New York because where are the police? Anyway, what else was I going to say?
The foundation.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so in the end,
Finance.
we were striking out again and again and again. And so they went to the Department of Justice because they work with the DOJ a lot, because the DOJ is responsible for administering the death and disability benefits for first responders. And they had been told that they were not doing a good job about letting their would-be constituents know about these benefits. And so Ron, the fire chief that I worked with, went and said, we have this exhibit. If we take it to fire conventions around the country, firefighters will come like this, like a moth to a flame, and while they're there, they can learn about all the DOJ stuff. So the whole back side of the wall, when we toured, had information about that, and anyway. So the DOJ wound up giving us about $200,000 to cover the tour of the whole thing. I then had to pay for every physical element of it, so there was no ambiguity about who owned the exhibit when it was over. Anyway, yes?
Also, talk a little about the presentation. I know you did the individual paintings, but the plastic and the layout on the wall.
Okay. Well, that was part of what was planned in that whole year where I was waiting for an intern to do the preliminary. I knew that they'd be fragile because of the burned wood, so they couldn't be touched, and who would want to do this exhibit if you had to hang 343 pieces? But mainly because they would be more secure if they were permanently touched, so they had to be bolted through the back. So they are bolted through the back through this aluminum. So these aluminum panels had to be cut, had to be powder coated white, had to be water drilled, whatever, to get all those little holes in the right place. It was not all assembled. That was all made in Colorado. That was all made in Boulder, and then it was shipped out to Maryland, where I then installed all the paintings on the pieces. It was really interesting because the crates that they went in, which are in storage somewhere here, each panel has its own crates, and then those crates go into one of two larger crates, which each weigh about 600 pounds when all is said and done. And so we get there to very humid Maryland, and we can't pull the crates out of the inner crates out of the outer ones because they were made in dry Colorado, and now they're in really humid. So anyway, we solved that. We put a handle on them, and they can come out now. But it was very funny just trying to get them out. It was a very real difference in the humidity level. I knew I needed the plastic because I knew people would want to be touching. And the first time that we were on exhibit, in fact, people were touching. And when they touched, it pushed the plastic in, and it was hitting the faces. So the only thing I had to add was these. And I went back to my Colorado Plastics up in Boulder, and I said, cut me these little inch things, and then how do I glue them? And he connected me with this guy with this super, 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 super good tape. And there's a little piece of tape. But then it means that this doesn't push in anymore when people come and take their photos or do what they do with it, and you have to clean them off. But yeah, there was a lot of pre-planning necessary on this thing, and my brain likes that kind of stuff, so I was quite happy to do that.
Is there a book with each picture and a little bit about each person
No,
that you could get?
well, no, they're on my Facebook page, on the Better Angels 911 Facebook page. I post them one a day, every day. I thankfully can schedule a month's worth at a time, and I have to go to that site every day to like everything that's posted, to make sure no junk gets on it. Hardly ever does, but sometimes some junk creeps through. I throw it out. And I get comments like, miss you, Daddy. So, lots of things like that. But these guys love to rescue people. You know, they just do. That's what they like to do. Thank goodness.
Thank you.
Thank you.